huge pleasure to welcome you all to the digital and virtual Mcb Tech 20. We're coming to you from Media City Bergen, where the Norwegian Media Cluster and the Norwegian FinTech Cluster both are headquartered. We've been through some quite difficult and challenging times these past few months. However, there's nothing that's been able to hold us back from making Mcb Tech a reality. Or what do you say, Anne?
I totally agree, Rea. And as you can see, we are going ahead with Mcb Tech 20, just a little bit different. We are in a virtual studio made by one of the companies in the media cluster, and it's time to get a tech update from some of the brightest minds in the industry. So please join us with this stellar lineup.
Henrik Syse, the prominent Norwegian philosopher and author.
David Carroll, the man who took Cambridge Analytica to court for access to his personal data.
Digitally China with Tom and Jacob, who are back with an update on how the digital dragon is rising.
Henrik Syse, the chief media cluster nerd directly from the high-tech, disruptive, borderline crazy and slightly chaotic NRK sandbox. And finally, a glimpse behind the scenes on how this virtual studio was made, using tech and solutions from the Norwegian media cluster. But first, Mcb Tech is all about looking into the future, but we have to dwell a little bit on the fact that we are in the midst of a global pandemic crisis. So the concept of future, it has new meaning to all of us, Rea.
Absolutely, Anne. This is why we've invited the prominent Norwegian philosopher and author, Henrik Syse, to kick off Mcb Tech 20. You all know Syse as a research professor at the Peace Research Institute in Oslo, and as a part-time professor at Bjørknes College. He's published in the fields of philosophy, politics, religion, and ethics, and he has some very specific ideas on how we can create a robust society for the future, where ethics and technology go hand in hand. But how do we as humans, Henrik, relate to the concept of the future? What is really the connection between humans and technology?
Ladies and gentlemen, and computers, I might say today.
Thank you so much to Henrik Syse. This definitely gave us some food for thought, and we'll be absolutely happy to have you back for Mcb Tech 2040.
Moving on. If you have attended Mcb Tech before, you know the chief media cluster nerd, Mr. Henrik Syse, who normally takes us into the bits and bytes and the deep tech universe with his own twist, that is. So to continue this tradition, we are now heading over to the NRK sandbox for an update from Henrik.
Welcome to the NRK Beta Lab. I'll talk about 3 different technologies today, and I'll start by talking about some of the machines behind me here. 3D printing, which is something that we use all the time here at NRK Beta. The most common 3D printers use plastic on rolls like these, and the plastic is then taken all the way down to a tiny nozzle down here where the plastic is melted. And as you can see, this printer is inside a tent, and that is because 3D printers, they don't like draft and cold air. They want it hot so that the plastic is not cooled down too fast. We have 2 printers, and the other one here didn't have a tent, so we had some problems, but I have solved that in the NRK Beta way by making this very advanced anti-warp shield 2.0 for our Ultimaker. Works like a charm, so it gets hot in here and everything works like it should. There are a lot of different plastics that you can use, and they come in all different colors and different shapes, and you can use them to make different things. This one is regular hard plastic like Lego. This one is called Ninja Flex. It's flexible, so you can print tires and rubber bands and whatever. This one is actually plastic with tree wood in it, so you can shape it more like you would with wood. This is nylon, which is very, very, very sturdy and hard. This one actually contains metal, copper, so you can also make it look more like it's of metal, and it is actually, I think it's 40% metal or something, so you can feel this one is heavy and cold compared to the other ones there. But the big question is what we're making with this. What I have here is the controller that was used by the producer when running around with Lars Monsen in the Norwegian mountains a couple of summers ago. 3D printed, because you can't buy this thing in the shop, so you need to build it. And we use it for kind of all kinds of special boxes that we need when we build equipment. This one specially made with a small screen here and electronics inside, and we can make it with the exact measures that we need. We make huge amounts of small kind of things to mount cameras and microphones and stuff like that when we help the NRK with special productions. I use it to fix my umbrella from Bergen. I have always a good umbrella. It broke, but I made this one. This is 3D printed because I lost the one that was there in the beginning. This one, we needed a vise in the shop here when we are working, so instead of buying one, we just 3D printed one. I have a box here, the most useless box that I've ever built, the cool one, which is just simply cool when you turn it on. But same thing here, the box, everything is designed and 3D printed. I have a air purifier that I designed and built, and the box where you have the control buttons to control the air purifier, 3D printed of course. And the last thing, one of the biggest things I've printed, or most advanced things, is this one. Completely stepper motor controllable microscope. Pretty advanced print, but works very well. So kind of, you can say when it comes to a 3D printer, it's only the imagination that stops you from making things. So that's it for the beta lab, because now I'm going to move to another lab, the lab where we are having fun with these drones, and I'll show you why this one, which is the Mavic Mini, which is tiny, is so last year, because we have something else this year that's even more fun.
That was the Chief Media Cluster nerd himself, Mr. Henrik Syse, and we will check in on him again after our next speaker. But now, let's go behind the scenes.
It's a huge pleasure to welcome you all to the digital and virtual Mcb Tech 20.
So this coronavirus really changed everything. And of course, this conference normally will have hundreds of people in Bergen every year, but this year we had to move it online. And using the technology and the solutions from the Norwegian Media Cluster, we are able to put the whole conference in a virtual studio, which is made by Mcb, one of the Media Cluster companies.
Outro, take 1.
We are Mcb, and we are a proud member of the Norwegian Media Cluster here in Bergen. We are a design and branding company, and our main focus is on making TV studios, mostly. So what we do is that we make a studio in a virtual space, and we put a trackable camera in our studio, which is just, we put up one here in our office, which is just a tiny green screen with a trackable camera and some lights. And what you do is that when you're in the studio, when you move the camera inside the studio. The camera thinks it's inside the studio. So if you move outside the green screen, what you see is the studio. And you can also see the physical camera move together.
Using a virtual studio like this gives us the opportunity to have the speaker deliver their message in a really cool and new environment, which is way better than your usual webinar these days.
Due to the coronavirus, we have tried to really work our way around the boring Zoom, Skype conversations, really, because it's so you know, 2D, I guess.
How do we, as humans, Henrik, relate to the concept of the future?
What we're doing is that we have our main studio here.
Du kan like klappe bare for...
And we have a presenter, and then we have a show or just the main stage right here. So what you can do is that you can bring people in from all around the world into the studio with, right now we're doing screens, so that you can just like, and then it will come in, and then you can talk to them in the studio. And it's also pretty interactive because people online can also write in questions, and then they can pop up on the screen. It's like, oh, so Thomas is asking this question, and blah, blah, blah. And I think people really feel that they're a part of it, and that's really cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, and computers, I might say today.
So, and what we're really trying to do now is to actually get them into the studio. So let's say you're one in LA, there's one guy in London, and they both have green screens. Now, what we're gonna try to do is to make them pop up in the studio, not on a screen, but actually in the studio. So it's like Star Wars, sort of.
We're moving on, and we're heading over to New York City to Professor David Carroll. David visited us at McB Tech last year, talking about how he single-handedly took Cambridge Analytica to court to fight for his rights to his voter data. Carroll has since become a leading advocate for data protection rights in the United States.
You all remember the story. Cambridge Analytica accessed the data of near 90 million Facebook users without their consent to target advertising for President Donald Trump's 2016 campaign. David Carroll is also featured by Netflix in the film The Great Hack, a documentary providing an inside look into the Cambridge Analytica scandal. It is a huge pleasure, David, to have you with us today, and we are really eager to know, were you finally able to get your data back? And is data privacy at all improved as the next election is coming up?
Hello, I'm David Carroll, and I am pleased to be able to reach you at Media Center Bergen again this year, despite the realities of our world. Last year, I was able to come to Bergen and tell you the story of the Cambridge Analytica scandal in great detail. And we were able to screen the Netflix documentary, The Great Hack, before it was released to the world. And since then, perhaps hundreds of millions of people around the world have seen The Great Hack and have learned about the Cambridge Analytica scandal and what it portends for our democracies and our technologies and how we can bend the arc of justice. And here we are now, a year later, and I am able to speak to you again, although remotely, because we cannot travel because of the pandemic, but we're also witnessing incredible civil response to the injustices in this world. And the Cambridge Analytica story is distantly connected to that. So I can offer some brief updates as to where things stand even a year later. Indeed, if you have seen The Great Hack, you know that at the end of the film, I say that I will probably never get my data and that the case is behind me now. And unfortunately, it still stands that I have still not received any of the answers from the UK Information Commissioner's office that we originally asked. Where did they get our data? What did they do with it? Do we have a right to opt out? Those questions still remain unanswered. And the Information Commissioner's report of the forensics of the servers that they seized under criminal warrant has still not been publicized to the public. And so we are racing towards another presidential election in the United States, and we have changed no laws, and we have only made the slightest changes to the relationship between our data and our democracy. And we still don't know what really happened in 2016 as we rocket towards 2020. But I can share with you a couple of brief things that have happened since I was last able to address the Media Center Bergen community last year. Perhaps the most significant development has occurred fairly recently, in that the US Congress House Intelligence Committee that was investigating the Russia scandal has released its transcripts to the public of the interviews that it had with various subjects of that investigation. And the Cambridge Analytica scandal did play a part. It was a subject of the Mueller investigation. And so we can see some transcripts now open to the public. They're available at intelligence.house.gov for the world to see. So you can fact check me on this. And two transcripts that stuck out to me when they were released related directly to the Cambridge Analytica scandal. The most important one was, of course, the transcript of the interview with the Cambridge Analytica CEO, Alexander Nix. Alexander Nix was interviewed by the House Intelligence Committee investigating the Russia scandal over Skype. He didn't even come to the United States for the interview. And in that interview, he misleads and lies to the US Congress in multiple ways, multiple times. And we can just go and read it, and anyone familiar with the scandal can see for themselves. For example, when US lawmakers asked Alexander Nix if he had inappropriately, illegally, illicitly obtained Facebook data from millions and millions of Facebook users, Alexander Nix denied it, even though we know he was lying. And when US lawmakers asked Alexander Nix repeatedly if US voter data had been processed in the United Kingdom, he dodged and evaded and dissembled his responses. He would not admit the truth that I easily proved in March of 2017 by doing a subject access request, which is a foundation of European data protection law and rights. I proved then that indeed the company admitted to me that it had processed US voter data in the United Kingdom in connection with the 2016 election. But when US electeds asked Alexander Nix that question, he refused to say the truth. So we are still at the point where bad guys can commit mass data abuse, and when they're investigated, they can simply lie, and they can get away with the lies. So we have still so much work to do in this world to enshrine and protect the data rights of every person in this world, especially related to our democracies. And we cannot let the bad guys get away with it, because the Cambridge Analytica story has served as a blueprint now for how you can get away with it. Just lie. Just lie your way out of it. The last thing that I'll share with you in terms of a revelation since I've last had the chance to talk to you about this problem is the transcript from Brad Parscale. And Brad Parscale was basically the web designer for the Trump organization, who was then basically conscripted to become the digital campaign manager in 2016, and is currently the campaign manager for the Trump re-election campaign of 2020. And in his transcript, released by the House Intelligence Committee, he was asked a very specific and very significant question that is highly technical, And if you understand the technical aspects of it and you understand the technologies, it is a revelation. The press, especially in the United States, downplayed Cambridge Analytica significantly. Narratives that we heard were, oh, Cambridge Analytica didn't really work, they didn't really use them, it was all snake oil. When the House Intelligence Committee asked Brad Parscale about Cambridge Analytica, they asked him a very pointed question. The question was, and again, you can read the transcript yourselves and fact check me. They asked him, what data was uploaded into Facebook to target voters? And Brad Parscale acknowledged that data from the Republican National Committee and Cambridge Analytica was uploaded into Facebook using Facebook's custom audiences feature. The feature that most people don't realize allows advertisers of any kind to take your personal data, upload it into Facebook to target you by name as an individual. When Brad Parscale admitted that Cambridge Analytica data was indeed uploaded into Facebook to target US voters in the 2016 election, he closed the loop on the scandal. And let me explain. We know that the Facebook profiles of more than 87 million people were illicitly harvested by the company. We know that that violated the FTC Act because Alexander Nix and Alexander Kogan, probably the perpetrators of that harvesting, settled with the FTC for deceptive practices. A slap on the wrist, but a violation nonetheless. That data was used to create an algorithm, a model, a data model to predict the personalities and voting intentions of all registered voters. And in fact, the ICO implicitly acknowledges that every registered voter in the United States was a victim of mass data abuse because it was unlawful and illegal to create a political profile of US voters without their knowledge or consent or appropriate European data protection rights, because it happened in Europe during the time. At the time, the UK was a member of the European Union. It was subject to the UK Data Protection Act of 1998. The GDPR had not yet become in effect, but there was already laws in the books that applied. So we have this data model that was created by illicitly harvesting people's data. That data model was used to create voter lists of pre-targeted voters. Because Brad Parscale told the House Intelligence Committee that those voter lists were generated by Cambridge Analytica and uploaded into Facebook during the 2016 election, illegal data was taken out of Facebook, put into an algorithm, and then put back into Facebook. It was a 360-degree loop of unlawful data abuse. It was legal in the United States, but it was not legal in the UK. A very complicated issue that has not really been addressed. But at least we now know the truth, that mass data abuse is occurring in our democracies. And we have not yet figured out how to punish the bad guys so they don't do it again. This can happen in any democracy. And of course, we learned from not only the documentary, The Great Hack on Netflix, but also since I have last been able to talk to the Media Center Bergen community, the other subject of the documentary, Brittany Kaiser, the former lieutenant of the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, Alexander Nix, has begun to release the contents of her hard drive, under a Twitter handle called Hindsight Files. And we can see their activities around the world in countries large and small, in every corner of the globe. This is an international business, and there's not much that prevents it from happening. And even when the bad guys get caught, they can just lie their way out of it and declare bankruptcy. We have a lot of work to do to protect our data. We have a lot of work to do to protect our democracies. And we have a lot of work to do to create a more just society. But at least now, even in a pandemic, we're in a moment where we can see that people really care about this. This is really important. And it's what brings us all together as humans around the globe. So I really appreciate the opportunity of being able to talk to the Media Center Bergen community again. And I wish everyone the best possible health and safety, and to feel at least positive that justice will prevail and the arc of history will bend toward justice as long as we all keep paying attention. Thank you very much.
So now I've moved over to the drone lab here at the NRK, and we have huge amounts of different drones here. Big ones, this one, really big ones. But for the last couple of years, the drones have been getting smaller and smaller because the cameras are smaller and smaller. So this one is actually one that we use quite a lot at the NRK, much smaller than the huge one there. Last year, this one came out, and we're actually using this one as well. It's still good enough for something that we can use it for at the NRK. But the really cool stuff this year is even smaller. This one looks like a toy, and basically it is a toy. And the camera here is good for my goggles so that I can fly it like I'm inside it. But the camera is not good enough for television production. But the cameras are getting smaller and smaller. So we have this small camera here, and we have 3D printed, of course, a small clip-on for this drone. And this camera has quite good digital stabilization. And what I'm going to show you at the end here is what we can do if we clip this one on this tiny drone, and we can see what is possible to film with a drone like this and that kind of camera. So now we'll try to fly this one outside here. It's a little bit windy, but we'll try. And what I do here is that I have a live feed from the drone in my goggles so that I can fly it like I'm inside it.
we are ending up in Asia today, one of the fastest moving markets in the world. The last few years, we have looked less to Silicon Valley and more towards Asia, because that's where the innovation happens now.
That's right. Our good friends Jacob and Tom from Digitally China are serving up the latest on the fast-changing nature of innovation and tech in China. Since we last spoke at Mcb Tech 18, a lot has changed. We're looking forward to hearing more on how Chinese companies have changed during COVID-19. How have these companies worked with digital innovation, and what can we learn from a European perspective?
Yes, thank you so much for having us again. We are really excited to be on board, even though it is not live in Bergen. I hope this virtual version is going to be as good or even better as last time. So today we're actually going to do a deep dive into how COVID-19 impacted China, and being one of the first countries going through this crisis, how the companies and how innovation changed because of COVID-19. But before we go into that, I thought it would be a good idea for us to maybe go back and talk a little bit more about why China is so exciting to study right now from an innovation perspective.
Right, so a little bit about us. We've been running 2 podcasts now for about 5 years, one in English, one in Swedish, and we're kind of dissecting the tech scene in China and online behaviors and so on. But I think, going directly to COVID-19, what is so interesting right now is that the shift that we've been seeing for the last years over to online, it's just becoming very apparent that this is no longer a choice for companies. And if we look at China, and the story that we like to tell is why user behavior and online behavior and so on is so far beyond and in front of many Western markets, it really comes down to this extreme growth that we've been seeing in China for the last 30 years. So we've seen a growth in, obviously, financials, we've seen a growth in cultural behavior and so on, but all of this has been skyrocketed by technology in terms of people getting a smartphone in their hands. And this is why we see user adoption usually in China going from 0 to 1 or 0 to 100 so much faster than most Western markets. This kind of lack of an offline legacy. And this is also what has given kind of ground for a lot of these huge companies that we talk about in the podcast. So if we look at companies such as Tencent, Alibaba, Alipay, and Didi, and then their American versions to your right, you can compare these companies in terms of they've done different things, but they're still in the same category. And as you can see in terms of numbers, the valuation of the American companies is still kind of overall higher. But for Tencent to build a market cap of almost $500 billion, they took one market, whereas Facebook had to take so many more markets to build almost the same market cap. And this is also kind of interesting to think about why these Chinese companies really haven't gone outside with China before, because they can build these huge companies on their home market. They don't have to care about expanding overseas and so on. And then if we look at kind of the next generation of companies, 5 of 10 of the top 10 unicorns right now is coming from China. So this is also why it's so fascinating to study this market overall. And where it becomes really apparent, and obviously when we study things such as the behavior shift of COVID-19 and so on, we have many more people to study when it comes to online behavior, when the online behavior is so much more mature. So if you look at the e-commerce the kind of market in China, it's obviously the biggest in the world, and it's so far beyond any other market. So if we start studying these behaviors, we can learn so much more than most other markets.
And I think everyone knows that COVID-19 has been an acceleration of current trends. The digital transformation has gone faster than ever. And it's from that perspective, I think we have been studying China a little bit during this crisis, because number one, of course, they were the first market going through this, but also from the perspective of actually them being way more digitally mature before the crisis in terms of e-commerce and such. And therefore, it's been interesting to see what happens there when it accelerates. But let us go back to a little bit about COVID-19 and what happened in the beginning in China and how this impacted both companies and innovation. So firstly, of course, Asia, led by China, was hit slightly differently during this crisis, mainly on the consumer end, because these consumers remembered the last huge crisis that we didn't have in Europe or in the US, which was the SARS epidemic. And what this caused was not only, of course, a shutdown of a lot of retail and offline spaces, but also, even though the cities that still had open, no consumers were out there. And simply because they remembered how it was last time, and everyone was more afraid of whatever was going to happen now than any equivalent in Europe. And therefore that created like this huge drop. The offline places, even though if they were open, dropped in sales immediately. And unfortunately, there aren't that many numbers from multinational companies about the impact, but I think we can go through a few numbers here, basically mainly from Adidas. But the way I would translate these numbers is to look at them as an example for the industry as whole, more than only specifically Adidas. We're not singling them out there. We're actually just using their numbers because they were one of the few that have been very transparent very early on regarding how this hit their both top line and bottom line. And what they announced pretty early in February during the peak of the virus in China was that they were going to drop 80% of their revenues, total revenues including e-commerce, which is kind of dramatic for such a big brand with such a huge presence in China. And in absolute numbers, they were talking about around $1 billion US. And if we just put that in perspective, and what does $1 billion US actually mean, is that if we actually look at 2019, the financial crisis that hit the entire world, Adidas lost about 6% of their global revenues, which was more or less just below $1 billion there. But if we look at this COVID-19 situation now, only in China, they lost during quarter one, they lost 10% of their global revenues, only in China. So only during COVID-19 in China, it already hit Adidas harder than the entire financial crisis in the entire world. And I think that's kind of telling about how extreme this has been. And obviously now a few more months have gone, and we're probably gonna see way worse impact considering the rest of the world has also shut down. The reason we're showcasing these numbers is to give everyone an understanding of how dramatic this actually has been. And remember, we're talking about loss of revenue. So this is not that the profits went down 10% or anything. This is literally the top line that went down 10%. And again, we should look at this as a representative for the entire industry or retail or consumption overall. I mean, we've seen some numbers coming out of the market in China now, where we've seen that convenience stores dropped 47% and apparel dropped overall 88%. And this has been in the retail spaces now. So again, everything almost died. And this is what I think is an interesting learning when we think about this more. So suddenly everything dropped dead. And then, what happens then? And there is this famous saying, Jacob, right, that it takes 30 days to build a new behavior.
Right. So the kind of old marketing term, right? And it's been more than 30 days. So if you kind of start looking at where the consumer really comes from, we've experienced this fundamental questioning of the core stuff of people's needs. So, you worry about your safety, about your financials, about having a roof over your head, kind of really fundamental things in your life. So it's not just that the offline services that we're used to in terms of user behavior has not been available. It's in combination with the fundamental shift in consumer needs and mentality So I think we have to have that in mind. So in China, what we saw was that, like everywhere else, pharmacy went up, grocery online obviously went up quite a bit, and almost 50% of people shifted from offline to online almost immediately. Yeah. So that was very kind of similar to the rest of the world. But because of China, it's a little bit more like it further ahead in terms of this crisis. What we see now is that 70% tried something new during this crisis. And of these 70%, 2/3 will actually continue doing that something new after the crisis. And if you think about that, I think, we haven't really seen a big shift like that before in history.
Yeah, and it's weird, right? Because we're literally talking about overnight, everyone across 1.3, 1.4 billion people, 73% of them tries a new digital product or service that they've never tried before because COVID-19 forced them to. So we've never seen this type of user adoption before for anything. And what's interesting for me, I believe here is the fact that at least based on the surveys, what you mentioned, that more than 2/3 are actually going to keep on doing the new thing they just learned. And this really proves the whole, it takes 30 days to build a new behavior thing.
Right, yeah. And maybe we haven't seen this big a shift before since the launching of the iPhone. So if we think about this moment as of that, I think as companies, we have to really have a completely different strategy going forward to think about where the consumer behavior and the consumer need is beyond this crisis.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. And talking more about the digital services and the innovation and what happened in China. So let's get into that a little bit. So number one is we have an overall big question is that, yes, we've seen huge digital adoption. We've seen that in all the markets, so not only China. But I think China is the first market where we can see how it is during the recovery phase as they moved into that. But there is a key question here, which is that enough? And now we're going to focus again on consumption and retail and e-commerce here. So if we look at some numbers that came out of China in March. So March, I would say, was the month where the country still hadn't gone into recovery. So it was still during the crisis. So we see that most brands in China, and these numbers are the increase on their main e-commerce site on Tmall, on Alibaba in China. So we see that most brands have increased quite substantially. If we talk about absolute numbers or percentage, this is very good growth. But as everyone can guess immediately when looking at these numbers, comparing to March last year, obviously this growth is not close to enough to compensate for an 88% drop in retail. So imagine you're one of these large apparel chains and you have a few thousand stores across China, and suddenly you make zero from that, and digital increases, but doesn't compensate for that. So there is a question here whether we're seeing the beginning of a new trend, which is that the retail chains are now getting a business case proven, which is that, okay, so this is the maximum revenue we can make if we wouldn't have retail. So then the question is, should we still keep retail, considering that revenue is less profitable in many cases than the e-commerce revenue? Or maybe can we as a company maybe drive the same type of profits to our shareholders while, even though the overall revenue dropped, but still would drive the same absolute numbers of profits and actually reduce the risk of the company? I think that's a very interesting finding a lot of these companies are seeing right now, and we'll probably see a lot of these chains act after those insights. I think another thing that has proven during this, if we look at digital and e-commerce sales, has been that we're seeing that mainly low frequency, high average purchase type of products have been increasing quite a lot, because people still want that joy or want that luxury in their life. But the high frequency and low price product, such as the t-shirts you buy every week or whatever, they obviously reduce quite dramatically because you're not out as much, and that's probably going to normalize later when people actually are out and about a little bit more. But let's talk a little bit more about the key thing that happened, which is that during the crisis, during the shutdown, as you've seen in your home countries as well, there's one key thing that's been lacking, which is the offline retail experience. So for me as a human being, I actually miss that. I miss being inspired by different colors and a physical space, And of course, e-commerce is nice if I want to buy something, but that's it. It doesn't give me the same joy or same kind of inspiration when I as a consumer am out there. And I think this has been one of the key things we've seen in China that we will see replicated in lower scale across the rest of the world. Because within this space, innovation had already began a year, or actually taken off very much about a year before COVID-19. And now we just saw that COVID-19 was actually accelerating this new trend, which is digital e-commerce type of experiences that try again to replace some of the offline feeling that you get as a consumer. And what we basically call the discovery-based experience. If we look at some companies, the very famous companies such as Pinduoduo and a few others, we've seen a business case in China over the last few years where basically a new category of e-commerce sales or revenue has been generated, which has been what we call, again, the discovery-based. So the old e-commerce world is a search-based one. Where you go into Amazon or you go into Alibaba, you just search because you want a pair of new shoes. But then the question is, there's another shopping, the one that you have in retail, which is the one you could just go around, you're in a good mood, and you get inspired, and suddenly you see something. You see a sweater you really want. You didn't know you needed a new sweater before, but you still purchase it. And that's a large part, obviously, of the GDP. And we've seen some digital innovation there, and it's mainly driven by new social type of activities and apps such as TikTok or Red or Pinduoduo, like I mentioned before. So if we would just summarize that, search is the tool you use when you want to buy something. E-commerce is obviously the most efficient way to buy something because then you need to go to a store. But what was lacking before was the inspiration and the discovery phase of this that would enable a consumer to be relaxed first and then somehow just get the inspiration about this new sweater. And like I mentioned before, already before the COVID-19 crisis, what we call live shopping, which is the combination of live streaming with e-commerce integrated, that had already been starting to kind of accelerate quite a lot in China. So 2019, again, no crisis, no COVID-19 during 2019, it took almost 1% of the entire retail market, which is kind of fantastic for a new trend that only existed for 2-3 years in China, right? And the interesting thing about live shopping is that you are in a mobile-only environment. You're looking at a live stream of someone showcasing fashion or any type of product for you. It could even be a car or a location, like for tourism. You can chat with a lot of other people that are there live during exactly this time. So you build that type of social feeling that you get when you're out in a retail store and a lot of other people are, you're there with friends and whatnot and browsing clothes together. And but at the same time, while they are displaying the clothes and showcasing the clothes, you get buy buttons immediately in the same window where you can tap, you can buy. It's integrated with e-commerce that enables then, you to just immediately get it while still watching the show. And this, again, was a huge thing where the largest live streamers doing this in China, usually amass tens of millions of viewers for each live shopping show that they usually host during evenings when people are off work. And this is one of the key things that we saw really accelerate during the crisis, obviously because it feels an even larger type of emptiness among the consumers during the crisis because you literally cannot go out to retail and go out in the world, right? And I think that's what we see that has been the interesting part of this. And if we actually would digest this a little bit and the principles of this discovery-based shopping, we're talking about a lot of the elements that we can see are represented in the offline world. And again, during the crisis, we really saw this accelerate. According to official numbers, during the first quarter in China, during the height of the crisis, we saw actually 4 million streams of these type of e-commerce streams where people showcase a product and sell them immediately in Q1. So this is only China, and it's 4 million of them. Kind of fantastic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is so interesting. Why we're looking at retail as an example is that it's been hit so much more harder and directly than every other industry, more or less. And we also see a user behavior that is pretty mature, and there's a pretty concrete output with e-commerce and retail and so on. So so overall, I think users are looking for kind of new experiences that have the elements of what they used to do offline. So in shopping, again, you were searching for that same kind of experience as when you're kind of walking around in a shopping mall, maybe having a coffee with your friends. It's a very social experience, right? And then you kind of impulse buy here and there, a piece of clothing here or something over there. And so we're kind of searching for that online. And this really reminds us of how we've been consuming media for the last years. It used to be very search-based. I search for an article, or I go into a news site to kind of consume news and so on. And now it's being served to us in social channels. And this is now happening to shopping and being accelerated thanks to COVID-19. And I think that's a very fascinating kind of development in general.
Yeah, and to wrap this up, I want to conclude with the question everyone is asking right now. Sure, new behavior, new stuff during COVID-19. What happens when this is over? Will everyone go back to being normal? And I think, again, there is where we need to go back to one of the numbers we mentioned earlier, which is that over 2/3 will keep on doing something they tried for the first time. So all the new consumers now trying this live streaming experience and live shopping experience, sure, they will not stop going into retail, but 2/3 of them will continue doing this as a complement to the entire shopping experience, and as a way for them to, in a digital space, to be relaxed and feel inspired instead of only just double checking prices, and actually learn from people about what colors fit with others and what type of sweater to buy. So I think like some final words about this is just that I really think we should not discount the fact that people were forced to use these things and therefore they had to use them, but who might like them, because what is growing up now is a new, very social type of target audience around the world that are very used to this live type of feeling through Instagram stories and through TikTok. And for them to be able to discover new products and buy stuff in this fashion, I'm not really sure a lot of them will think, retail is actually superior versus this. I'm actually pretty sure about the opposite, that they think this is a much better way to hang out with like-minded people that love the same thing as they do. So with that, thank you for having us today, and we hope to be able to actually see you physically next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now we have moved to my own lab at home, because I'm going to show you how to make something that could turn out rather useful this summer. We're going to build a system to automatically water the plants on your balcony. It's based on a kind of reservoir of water, much bigger than this one, but this is for testing purposes. and a water pump, easily available in different shops. It's a water pump that would be used in an aquarium. This one is 12 volts, 240 liters an hour. And a system of tubes to have the water drizzling into the different plants that you have. And here I have 3 plants that's kind of on my balcony. And the first thing you do is that you take your tube and you mark it, because here, one plant here, one here, and one here. And when you reach the last plant, you take the end of the tube and seal it up, because you don't want all the water to come out here. And what I do is that I use 2 millimeters and make holes. One here, one here. Okay. So now we have a system that will water these 3 plants, and we have the pump here connected to the pump. And this pump is 12 volts, so I have this power supply for the pump. And what you want to do is to be able to control it and turn it on and off at specific times. So what I use, or could use, is some kind of connector that speaks to your home automation system with IKEA or with Philips, or it could be a simple timer that you can program to just stop and stop 1 minute each afternoon. And we can try it. I have a battery pack here that I can use to just test the pump. And I know that it works, and I don't want everything here to get wet. So, just to see if this works. Yeah. And this is the kind of pump that needs to be submerged into water to work. So, down into the reservoir. Now, we have this one going to different volts here. And now, test. 12 volts. And here, watering system for all the different plants. And I can show you how my system works, because I'm slightly more geeky than this. I've made a system where I incorporate a soil sensor to check the soil and the moisture in the plants, and an ultrasonic sensor to check how much water is left in the reservoir, and a small computer to control it. We can go out and see how my system works. So the system that I have is in here, huge water reservoir, and here is the sensor that measures how much water is left. Here you can see that the water is going here, and this one is measuring the soil in here and the humidity. And you have all going into these different plants. And we can go inside and I can show you how I can control everything from my computer. So the system I have to control everything is based on this one, ESP. It's a small computer that can control sensors and relays and everything. So it controls the pump, and it can be controlled from here. I'm running something called ESP Easy, which is a software that gives me a web-based possibility of configuring everything. So on this one, I have 2 devices. It's the soil sensor with the humidity. So right now it's 68% humidity in the plant. And it's the water level, which is 32 liters right now. And then I can program this to start and stop based on how much water is left, on humidity, and on the time of day. And I can control it, of course, from wherever. So if I'm on vacation, I can still control the watering system here at home.
Well, it's a wrap. So a huge thank you to all of you watching today, and to our amazing speakers, Henrik Syse, David Carroll, Tom and Jacob from Digitally China, and Eirik Solheim.
We're looking forward to seeing you all back for Mcb Tech in June 2021, where we hopefully can meet in real life right here in Media City Bergen. So until then, stay safe and take care.